Silence doesn't knock on the door. It doesn't announce itself. It just moves in quietly and starts rearranging the furniture in his mind. When you stop speaking, when days turn into months with no word, no explanation, no closure, don't think nothing is happening on the other side. Something is happening. Something deep, something uncomfortable. Silence is not empty. Silence is loud. When the silence begins, the first thing that happens in his mind is denial. He tells himself it's temporary. He assumes you're busy, emotional, dramatic, or just taking space. He shrugs it off because confidence is easier than curiosity. In his mind, silence is harmless at first. He believes time will fix it, that you'll come back the way you always did. He keeps moving, talking, laughing, pretending. But silence is patient. It waits. When the silence first arrives, it is subtle, almost invisible. A text left unread without reply, a call missed unreturned, a day that passes without a word, and then another. At first, he convinces himself it is temporary, a natural pause in the ebb and flow of life. He doesn't panic. He doesn't feel the weight immediately because his mind refuses to believe that someone who once occupied so much space in his world could simply vanish without reason. He clings to familiarity, the comfortable pattern of communication, as though silence were a minor glitch in the system, rather than the quiet earthquake it truly is. In these first days, he treats absence lightly, assuming it will soon resolve itself as it always has, believing he will wake up one morning and hear your voice again, bright and familiar, filling the void he doesn't yet feel. The initial underestimation comes from habit, the routines that have lulled him into complacency. He remembers conversations that ended in laughter, days spent side by side, arguments that always ended in reconciliation. His mind searches desperately for precedent, for evidence that this silence too will pass. But the mind is a tricky thing. It clings to what is known and fears what is unknown. So he invents reasons. Maybe you're busy, overwhelmed, tired. Maybe it's a test, a fleeting frustration, a miscommunication. Every explanation is a lifeline thrown into the river of uncertainty. He reassures himself, clinging to small clues that silence is temporary, a social media post, a mutual friend's story, a shared memory resurfacing somewhere. It is human nature to avoid the discomfort of the unexplainable, and he leans into optimism like a shield. But beneath the surface, even in these early days, the mind begins to notice gaps. The brain, trained to expect interaction, begins cataloging the absence. He notices that mornings feel quieter, that routines feel incomplete without the familiar ping of your presence. He catches himself staring at his phone, only to realize hours have passed without a message. Even in the first week, the void begins to whisper, small and almost imperceptible. At night, when distractions fade, the quiet intrudes. He recalls things he wouldn't have considered important. Inside jokes, shared glances, a tone of voice that lingered. And the underestimation begins to strain under the weight of small truths. Absence isn't neutral. Silence has a gravity that pulls harder than he expected. He underestimates it because he mistakes silence for forgetfulness, assuming your life continues elsewhere, oblivious to him, but still tethered by connection. In truth, silence is never passive. It acts like a mirror, reflecting everything he has overlooked, everything he has taken for granted. And yet he continues to rationalize. Ego plays its role, soothing the mind with the illusion of control. It's fine, he tells himself. I'm fine. Things will go back to normal. The first month is the most deceptive period. He doesn't feel the full force yet because he is still shielded by hope, by routine, by the comforting rhythm of his own distractions. In this stage, he underestimates the silence precisely because he refuses to acknowledge the emptiness it leaves behind. As days turn into weeks, the underestimation becomes more fragile, a thread stretched taut. He starts to notice the subtle shifts in his own behavior. He checks his phone compulsively, replays conversations in his mind, analyzes every word, every pause, every glance. What he once brushed off as inconsequential begins to matter, and he feels the first stirrings of unease. The mind begins to betray him, reminding him of the constant companionship he has lost, of the warmth and clarity that once filled his days. At first, he laughs it off, distracted himself with work, friends, obligations. But the silence is patient, persistent, relentless. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the underestimation fades. He realizes, without yet admitting it fully, that silence is no longer just an absence of words. It is a force that reshapes his thoughts, recalibrates his emotions, and quietly begins to occupy a space he thought was reserved only for presence. After the initial underestimation of your silence, the mind begins to betray him in ways he cannot control. Memories start resurfacing, not gently, but insistently, like a film stuck on loop. Every laugh you shared, every argument that ended in compromise, every casual comment that once seemed trivial now carries weight. It begins innocently, a fleeting thought, a moment when you smiled, a phrase you said that once made him laugh. But soon these memories become relentless, demanding attention. They pierce the calm of his routines and seep into the quiet corners of his mind, filling spaces he once thought empty. He begins to see your face in unexpected places, in passing strangers, in reflections, in photographs, even in dreams. The mind, in the absence of your presence, becomes a projector, replaying scenes with unnerving clarity. The repetition of memories is both merciless and instructive. At first, he may resist it, dismissing recollections as coincidence or nostalgia. But silence leaves him no escape. Every quiet moment, the pauses in conversations with others, the long stretches of his day spent alone, acts as a trigger. A song on the radio, the smell of coffee, a phrase someone utters, all pull him back to the moments he thought were insignificant. Memories once harmless now become interrogators, asking questions he isn't ready to answer. Did you appreciate her? Did you say what you needed to say? Did you notice what you were losing? And with each replay, the vividness of the past grows sharper, reminding him that absence is not nothing. Absence is a magnifying glass. What makes this phase particularly agonizing is the selective nature of memory. The mind doesn't offer a balanced view, it magnifies what it misses. He remembers the warmth of your touch, the intensity of your gaze, the way your laughter could pierce through his stubbornness. He remembers the arguments too, but they no longer sting. They are lessons, reminders of what mattered and what he failed to notice. Memories that once felt routine now feel sacred, almost untouchable. He may even catch himself wishing he could rewind, replay moments differently, choose words more carefully, or show more vulnerability. And with each mental playback, a subtle shift occurs. He starts to realize that silence is teaching him through absence, forcing him to confront the value of what he once held for granted. The mind, left unchecked, begins to invent scenarios as well. He starts to imagine what your life might look like now, weaving together fragments of memory and speculation. Where did the connection falter? Did he misunderstand your intentions? Did he fail to notice your unspoken signals? This imagined narrative is both comforting and torturous. Comforting because it keeps you alive in his mind. Torturous because it emphasizes the distance between memory and reality. He wrestles with these thoughts, trying to reconcile who you were in the past with the silence that exists now. Each imagined conversation, each what if keeps the memory alive, yet underscores its impossibility. The replaying of memories also awakens empathy in unexpected ways. He begins to remember not just the moments he cherished, but the moments he neglected. He recalls when he was impatient, distracted, or unavailable. He remembers the little sacrifices you made that went unnoticed, the care you gave that went unappreciated, and the patience you held that he took for granted. In these quiet hours, the mind becomes a teacher, showing him the unseen layers of your presence. He starts to recognize that silence isn't just a void, it is a reflection of imbalance, of opportunities lost, and of lessons unlearned. Memories, once comforting, become a mirror, reflecting the depth of what he cannot touch anymore. Finally, as weeks turn into months, the repetition begins to change him. It is no longer just nostalgia or longing, it becomes understanding. Each memory, each replay forces him to confront truths he previously ignored. He begins to see your influence in ways he could not before, realizing how deeply your presence shaped his decisions, his thoughts, his heart. And as the memories accumulate, they begin to act like a quiet drumbeat in his consciousness, steady and unavoidable. They remind him that absence has a sound, and it is the echo of what once was. Memories, endlessly replayed, do not just preserve the past, they shape the present, molding his mind into a vessel capable of reflection, regret, and eventually growth. As the memories replay relentlessly, the ego steps in quietly at first, like a loyal but stubborn guard. It whispers reassurances, it's not your fault. She'll come back. You've done nothing wrong. At this stage, ego tries to maintain the illusion of control. It shields him from the sharp pangs of guilt or longing, convincing him that he is fine, that the silence is temporary, that absence does not equal loss. He clings to these narratives because they are comforting. For a while, the ego dominates the mind, allowing him to believe he can navigate this period without truly feeling its weight. It is a protective mechanism, a self-defense against the creeping realization that silence is not inert. It is alive, observant, and patient. The ego often manifests through rationalizations. He tells himself that your silence must be about you, not him. Maybe you're preoccupied, overwhelmed, or testing him. Ego turns every question into an answer that spares him discomfort, spinning stories that cast him in a favorable light. You're strong. You're resilient. She'll regret this. These thoughts are like armor against vulnerability, keeping him from diving into introspection, keeping him from facing emotions he is not ready to confront. Ego insists that he is the protagonist of his own story and that the narrative cannot be rewritten by absence alone. For days, weeks, even months, this internal voice maintains a precarious balance between denial and reality. But ego, no matter how loud, has its limits. It can only block reflection for so long before the mind notices the cracks, memories and longings seep through, and the rationalizations start to feel hollow. He may catch himself questioning the narratives ego has built. Am I really okay? Did I truly do nothing wrong? When these doubts creep in, the ego fights harder, insisting that silence is inconsequential, that pride is protection, that vulnerability is weakness. Yet the more he leans on ego, the more fragile it becomes. It is as if the mind is quietly reminding him that no armor can block the truth indefinitely. The frustration of this internal struggle is profound. Ego demands that he remain unshaken, yet the heart memory and absence refuse to cooperate. He may find himself oscillating between confidence and insecurity, between stubborn pride and quiet despair. In public, he may appear unbothered, composed, even indifferent. But inside, ego is fighting a war against feelings it cannot entirely suppress. He rationalizes interactions, overanalyzes words, and clings to the smallest justifications to maintain the illusion of control. Every smile he forces, every conversation he navigates is an act of defense, ego battling the emotional reality that silence is slowly reshaping him. The ego also twists perception in subtle ways. It exaggerates self-sufficiency, insists he is better off alone, or convinces him that you no longer matter. But deep down, these distortions are unsustainable. He cannot rely on rationalization alone when memories, longing, and reflection are relentless. The mind knows the truth before the ego admits it. Silence leaves an imprint too deep for pride to erase. Every quiet day, every unanswered message chips away at ego's facade, leaving him vulnerable to the very feelings it once tried to shield him from. Eventually, ego begins to falter. Its reassurances no longer ring true. Rationalizations feel like lies. Pride feels heavy. Even the smallest triggers, a memory, a photo, a word he recalls, crack the armor. And in that moment of vulnerability, he is confronted with reality. Silence is not neutral. It is not a test, not a punishment, not a trivial pause. It is a force that demands reckoning. Ego, once his ally, becomes a reminder of resistance, proof that even the strongest shields will not protect him forever. The final stage of this internal battle is revelation. He begins to understand that ego, while protective, is not a teacher. It cannot guide him to growth or self-awareness. It only postpones truth. And as ego recedes, he is left with himself, his thoughts, his regrets, his longing, and his responsibility. In that quiet, unguarded state, he begins to see the silence not as something external, but as a reflection of what he must confront within himself. For all its strength, ego is only temporary. Silence, however, is enduring. After ego begins to falter, a quieter, more insidious force takes its place: self-doubt. It doesn't arrive like a storm, it creeps in like a shadow at dusk, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. He begins to question every word, every gesture, every choice he made in your presence. What once felt confident and secure now feels uncertain, like walking on thin ice. The pride that once protected him is gone, and in its absence, doubts start whispering relentlessly. Did I say the wrong thing? Did I act selfishly? Did I misread her feelings? Silence magnifies these questions, leaving him with no immediate answers, no reassurance, and no way to undo what is already done. The mind, starved of your presence, begins overanalyzing every interaction. He replays conversations, scrutinizing intonation, timing, and body language. Words that once seemed ordinary now feel laden with unintended meaning. The small disagreements, the casual remarks, the jokes. Everything is dissected. Self-doubt thrives on this analysis, creating a storm of uncertainty where there was once clarity. Even decisions that seemed minor, like how he responded to a message or the tone he used in conversation, now feel monumental. In the echo of silence, he begins to fear that he has made irreversible mistakes. This self-doubt does not stay confined to your relationship alone. It spreads, infiltrating his daily life, altering the way he perceives himself and the world around him. At work, in friendships, even in moments of solitude, he begins second-guessing his choices, wondering whether he approaches everything with the same carelessness he applied with you. Decisions feel heavier. Words feel riskier. Every action is measured against an unseen standard, a hypothetical ideal he feels he failed to meet. In this way, silence reshapes not only his thoughts about the past, but also the lens through which he views the present. The uncertainty intensifies because silence is absolute. There are no signals, no explanations, no reconciliation. Every passing day is a reminder that he cannot control or predict your behavior. And this lack of control feeds the self-doubt. The mind, accustomed to certainty, or at least the illusion of it, struggles with the absence of resolution. He begins to wonder, did she stop caring? Did I fail to notice something critical? Could I have acted differently? These questions loop endlessly, unanswerable, leaving him in a liminal space between regret and longing. Self-doubt, unlike ego, does not protect him. It exposes him. It forces him to confront flaws, mistakes, and limitations he might have ignored before. He realizes that confidence was never absolute, that pride could only cover insecurities temporarily. Every forgotten promise, every overlooked gesture, every instance where he prioritized himself over the connection with you now feels magnified. In this way, silence becomes both a teacher and a tormentor, compelling him to face what he previously denied or dismissed. At times, this self-doubt can be paralyzing. He hesitates, afraid to act, to speak, to reach out, fearing further mistakes. And yet, paradoxically, it also has the potential to inspire reflection and growth. Each pang of uncertainty is a reminder that relationships, connection, and understanding are delicate, and that he must approach them with awareness and intention. The emptiness left by silence is not passive, it forces introspection, and introspection forces reckoning. Ultimately, as self-doubt grows, certainty, the confidence he once had, begins to dissolve completely. There is no shield left, no rationalization strong enough to counter it. He begins to understand that silence has a way of stripping away illusions, revealing what is true in the quietest, most uncomfortable way possible. That every action, every word, every choice carries weight. In the echo of your absence, he is left to confront the parts of himself he ignored, the things he took for granted, and the reality that silence is far more powerful than presence, because it forces him to face himself. When self-doubt has replaced certainty, silence begins to teach the hardest lesson of all: emotional accountability. There is no one else to blame, no convenient excuse, no distraction strong enough to avoid the truth. He is left alone with his thoughts, his memories, and the echo of absence. The mind can no longer rationalize or ignore. Every word he didn't speak, every feeling he suppressed, every gesture he took for granted comes forward demanding recognition. Silence has a way of cutting through ego and pride, leaving him face to face with the reality of his own behavior. At first, he resists. The truth is uncomfortable, painful, and sometimes unbearable. He remembers moments where he was impatient or inattentive, times he let pride dictate his actions instead of empathy. The things he once dismissed as minor now feel monumental, and the absence of your response amplifies their weight. Silence is not merely an absence of sound. It is a spotlight on what he has overlooked. It forces him to see the gaps between intention and action, between love expressed and love withheld. As the days pass, emotional accountability becomes unavoidable. He starts cataloging his mistakes in sharp detail, the things he could have said differently, the gestures he could have made, the moments he could have been present but was absent instead. Each recollection is a mirror reflecting his imperfections. Silence is patient, but it is also relentless, ensuring that no misstep goes unnoticed. In this way, it acts as both teacher and judge, compelling him to confront aspects of himself he would have rather ignored. The process is transformative, though often painful. With no one else to answer to, he begins to take responsibility for his feelings, his actions, and the outcomes they produced. The mind can no longer cling to excuses or blame external circumstances. Instead, it examines choices honestly, holding him accountable for the emotional energy he gave or failed to give to the relationship. This reflection is uncomfortable, but it is also clarifying, revealing not just his failures, but also the depth of what he truly values and what he cannot take for granted. Silence also exposes the gaps in his emotional literacy. The ways he avoided vulnerability, resisted honesty, or hid behind pride. He realizes that connection is more than shared laughter or proximity. It is effort, empathy, and the courage to be present fully, even when it is difficult. Emotional accountability forces him to confront not just the past, but the patterns he must change in order to grow. He begins to understand that relationships, like life, demand attention, care, and responsibility, and that absence is a harsh teacher for those who fail to recognize this. In confronting himself, he also begins to grasp the value of patience and introspection. Silence shows him that emotional maturity is not about dominance, pride, or control. It is about understanding the impact of one's actions on others. It teaches him to feel without judgment, to reflect without avoidance, and to accept responsibility without deflection. The quiet is no longer something he fears or resists. It becomes a mirror, a guide, and sometimes a balm, showing him the contours of his own heart and mind in ways that noise never could. By the time he has fully acknowledged the weight of your absence, the lessons of silence are etched into his consciousness. Emotional accountability is no longer abstract. It has become visceral, shaping his thoughts, behaviors, and the way he understands himself and others. The silence, once underestimated, has forced him into a reckoning, a confrontation with truth, responsibility, and the unspoken emotional debts he carries. In this state, he learns that absence teaches more than presence ever could, because it strips away pretense and leaves only what is real, raw, and undeniable. After months of absence, after memories have replayed, ego has faltered, self-doubt has gnawed, and emotional accountability has forced reflection, silence begins its final transformation. Change is inevitable. There is no escaping it, no shortcut around it. The mind, shaped and stretched by absence, begins to evolve. Whether for better or worse depends on what he chooses to do with the lessons carved into him. The silence, once a void, now acts as a crucible, refining, reshaping, and revealing who he truly is beneath the surface of pride, distraction, and habit. For some, this change is growth. He begins to understand the value of presence, the fragility of relationships, and the importance of intentionality in words and actions. What once was taken for granted, the laughter shared, the warmth of closeness, the simple act of showing up, becomes sacred knowledge. He learns patience, reflection, and empathy, recognizing that every silence is a test of character, a measure of how deeply one can appreciate what is absent. These lessons leave him quieter, wiser, and more attuned to the nuances of connection, ready to approach relationships with care, honesty, and presence. But change can also harden him. The same silence that teaches can also wound. If he fails to process the lessons or allows pride and fear to dominate, he may close off entirely. Walls go up, defenses become permanent, and vulnerability fades. The absence of your voice becomes a template for all future connections, a reminder that intimacy can disappear without warning. He may convince himself that detachment is safer than engagement, that avoidance is stronger than presence, and that emotional withdrawal is protection. In this form, silence does not foster growth. It becomes a wound that shapes his responses, his expectations, and his willingness to trust. Change, in any form, is never subtle. It penetrates the way he moves through life, the way he perceives others, and the way he perceives himself. Even ordinary days carry the weight of lessons learned or lessons avoided. He notices the way he listens, the way he responds, the way he anticipates, or fails to anticipate, needs and emotions. Habits formed during absence linger, whether they are habits of care, reflection, empathy, or distance, skepticism, and guardedness. Silence imprints on the subconscious, leaving a blueprint of transformation that is impossible to erase. The profoundness of this transformation often becomes clear in quiet moments when life slows and distractions fade. Perhaps he thinks of you in the middle of an ordinary day, or revisits a memory long buried. He feels the subtle ways he has changed, the patience that now steadies him, the awareness that informs him, the empathy that guides him, or the walls he has built and the distance he now maintains. Change born of silence cannot be ignored. It is evident in his thoughts, decisions, and even his approach to connection, shaping the man he becomes in ways that words alone could never achieve. Silence also teaches resilience. Regardless of whether he grows or hardens, he emerges different. He has been forced to confront absence, reflection, and consequence without distraction, without argument, and without the comfort of immediate reconciliation. This endurance builds an understanding that life and relationships carry uncertainty, and that emotional presence is a choice that must be actively cultivated. The man who endures silence emerges not unchanged, but transformed, marked by both loss and insight, by absence and by realization. Ultimately, the change is permanent. Silence leaves no part of the mind untouched. It rearranges priorities, reshapes perception, and challenges habitual responses. It can make him softer, more aware, and more capable of love, or it can make him more guarded, skeptical, and distant. The choice lies in how he interprets the lessons of absence. But the truth remains, silence never passes without leaving a mark. It does not merely wait. It teaches, reshapes, and ultimately decides who he becomes in ways presence could never fully command. Silence is not empty. Silence is not passive. Silence speaks in ways words never could. It waits patiently, watches quietly, and shapes relentlessly. It tests strength, exposes flaws, magnifies memories, and forces accountability. It strips away pride, challenges certainty, and reshapes the heart and mind, leaving no corner untouched. The man on the other side of silence emerges changed, whether softened by understanding or hardened by absence, whether wiser or more guarded, whether capable of deeper connection or more cautious than ever. What silence teaches is simple, yet profound presence is precious. Words carry weight and connection is fragile. It reminds us that absence is never neutral. It is a mirror, a teacher, a force that reveals the truths we often ignore when comfort and noise surround us. Every moment unspoken, every day without acknowledgement is a lesson in patience, reflection, and self-awareness. It is a challenge and a call to recognize the power of both our words and our silences. So the next time silence falls, remember this: it does not simply exist. It moves, it waits, it changes. And on the other side of that quiet, someone is listening, not to your voice, but to the echo of your presence, the shadow of your absence, and the truth that lingers long after words have faded. Silence does not forgive, but it does teach. And what it leaves behind is the chance to understand, to grow, and to truly see the weight of what was once taken for granted.